Do we really know each other? Let's talk about how creativity grows in community. Hi, I am Bethany Joy, and welcome to the Creativity Cure podcast. This is episode 4, and today we're going to be talking about vulnerability and how we can truly be connected to each other and foster that creative community between us. Before we get started, my name is Bethany Joy, and I am the owner of Bethany J Photography. I create custom portraits that are one of a kind in Maryland, and I also have this cool newsletter that you can join as well, where I like to connect people to local businesses as well as just tell stories of everyday people who I think are just encouraging. So, if you like this podcast, please make sure to save it on Apple or Spotify, and you can also follow me on YouTube. Just look up the Creativity Cure, like, save, subscribe, and click the little notification bell so you can know as soon as the videos go live. Finally, if you are looking to celebrate uniquely, you can book a portrait now by visiting BethanyJphotography.com and filling out the little form there. I would love to speak with you and get creative with you, and so to learn more, visit BethanyJphotography.com. Creativity grows when we are truly connected to community. How well do you truly know your neighbors, and how well do they truly know you? I recently dug into this topic as I was dealing with my own battle of confronting why I don't like conflict. I don't like conflict. I really don't. Just hearing people argue makes my hands sweat and my stomach hurts, and I know I'm not the only one. I recently took time to start thinking about this because it's just been something I've dealt with for a lot of my life, and I've never really thought about it. So I decided to deal with it because in order to grow, in order to be creative, you have to push boundaries. And when you push boundaries, you're going to run into conflict. When I painted a picture in my mind of what I wanted to avoid at all costs when it came to conflict, it was seeing friends become strangers. I had some painful memories of when people who I really cared about and loved, people who I thought I knew, suddenly became strangers. Either we just grew distant, grew apart naturally, or maybe I find out something about them that I had no idea about, and suddenly this person who I thought I knew was a stranger. I really thought about a couple of times in my life where I received devastating news about people who I really thought I was close to, and I couldn't help but question if the reason I maybe missed their need, maybe didn't hear them, was because I was a bad friend. Maybe it was because I wasn't being there for them. And it really concerned me because I don't want to go my whole life thinking that I'm close to people and then find out at the end of the day I didn't know them at all. This thinking led me to understand something I really wasn't able to put into words until recently. I didn't know how to handle disagreements and conflict because in my head it all turns into fights and separation. All conflict in my head led to breaking up of friends and seeing my loved ones become strangers. Number 2, that belief led me to often choose agreement for the sake of peace at the cost of not actually communicating my honest wants, needs, or desires. I'm going to say that again. I'm reading it because I want to really communicate this properly. I had a belief that led me to choose agreement for the sake of peace at the cost of not actually communicating my honest wants, needs, or desires. I began really thinking about how this had impacted my life, and I realized that I spent so much energy avoiding conflict that I had not really given myself the opportunity to be known or understood or heard. And the person who really helped me see this was actually my husband. I was just sharing with him about this problem, and what he said to me really helped. He was like, I'm not friends with my friends because we've never gone through anything. He said, I'm friends with my friends because we've gone to some crazy places and we made it through together. And I realized, which maybe some of you already have this down, but I realized that if I wanted to really build truly deep relationships, I'd have to be willing to go there with people to let them truly know who I am, even when we disagreed, so that we could have a real relationship and not just one based on me feeling as if I can only be a certain person around other people. I have to be honest, even when there's conflict or disagreement. What happened when I stopped acknowledging my true thoughts or feelings just to appear as if I'm getting along with others? I made a list of some things I really saw impact me. I might read it because it's a little lengthy, but just bear with me. So that's why I'm not looking at the camera. So the first thing was I reinforced the false idea that people only care about me when I show up happy and agreeable. If I don't feel like I will be accepted when I'm angry, sad, frustrated with someone close, I miss out on the opportunity to grow in that relationship. And I risk feeling lonely because there are parts of myself that are contained. Expressing a full range of emotions healthfully is normal, and that's probably super basic for some people, but it wasn't for me. Expressing how you feel to people you love, good, bad, and ugly, is healthy. Number 2, I went numb. I ignored myself for so long that I didn't know how to voice my own desires or needs. However, the frustration of not being heard or not being understood the way I would like to still would come through. Like I would still feel frustrated because I didn't know how to engage in confrontation, to deal with negative emotions, say when it comes to disagreeing with somebody. I just shut all my emotions down. And pretty soon, things that I was enjoying, things that I normally liked, even they became unenjoyable because I was so used to just ignoring myself for the sake of appearing happy and agreeable when I really wasn't. So I think a week or two ago, I was listening to The Basement with Tim Ross, and the video is on his YouTube page where he talks about how your emotions are like an alarm system. You should definitely go and watch that video if you haven't. It really helped me to navigate and move forward through this realization of why I don't like conflict. So the idea is that sometimes when we don't feel safe, right? And any emotion, he mentions, him and the professional he is on the show with mention that any emotion that is not happy is not safe. And so sometimes, in order to feel safe, we just shut down all emotion. But the truth is, your emotions are signals for things you need to deal with or address before they become bigger problems. So in my case, I definitely went numb, and that didn't make emotions go away. I just stopped expressing any emotion outwardly at all. And that really aggravated my loneliness. It aggravated my frustration because I felt like I couldn't speak when that wasn't true. And also it took a long time for me to work through that and come to the point where I am really trying to be very purposeful with stating my needs, stating my intentions, and being very honest about what I want so that people really know who I am. So when you're not honest about who you are, when you go along to get along or you people please, right? Doing things to sort of control your reputation, or your perception of your reputation instead of what you really believe you should be doing, agreeing when you don't agree, not really saying your full opinion, no one will really know you. So here's what I wrote. I'm just going to read it. When you aren't honest about who you are and what you think, and you ignore yourself, how can you expect anyone to know you? You always show up as what they want. You're their idea of you. And this is why people will be shocked when you set boundaries. You always didn't like how they behaved, right? but you never said anything. That's the example I chose. Like, you always didn't like the way someone did something, but you never said anything. So then when you decide to actually speak up, they're shocked. Why? Because they didn't know. They may have had no idea that you had a preference. And if you can relate to this, if you have anxiety, you probably can relate to spending so much time, especially if you have social anxiety, worrying about what other people think, that yeah, people really will have no idea. They may not. Some people will just ignore your preferences, but there are many people who I think just don't know. So I decided after thinking through all of this that years and years from now, when I look at my life, good, bad, and ugly, I want people to know who I am. I want them to know what I want. I want them to know what I believe, even if they don't like it or agree with it, because then at least we're dealing honestly and we're dealing in reality. I don't want to show up as what people want me to be. I want to be who I am, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it causes conflict. So, after kind of going through this week of looking at why I avoid conflict, why I'm very uncomfortable with it, why it doesn't make me feel safe, I found a couple of ways to move forward between talking with a therapist and doing a little bit of reading into empathy. Here were the practical ways I decided to choose to be more myself, more vulnerable, even in the face of conflict. This one shouldn't be a surprise, but number one for me was be honest. This was a first big step for me because I had to stop going along to get along. And I can be pretty opinionated about what I want, but then there are a lot of times, especially in a new environment, especially when I am, at a restaurant, for example, I'll ask for a specific food. Let's just say Chipotle, right? You go to Chipotle, you get your bowl. Let's say for me, I don't eat dairy, but sometimes if I'm not watching, they'll just go ahead and start putting things on there. So one thing I started doing is, even in small ways, I would stop and go back and make myself heard and be honest about what I wanted, instead of just accepting the bowl and saying like, oh no, that's fine, like I'm not going to worry about it. Nope, I went back and I was the person who was like, hey, I actually didn't want this. When someone asks me, how are you doing? Or asks me if I can do something, I try to be honest about how I feel. Now, I don't go into complete detail, but if I'm having a really rough day, I don't tell them that I'm super awesome and like really happy, because I wouldn't be honest. Um, and as I began or am still beginning to be honest in even really little ways with verbalizing my feelings, it becomes a little bit easier each time. My hope is that when I do have to have an important conversation where I really have to confront someone, I've built up the muscle of being honest and it's not as hard. So, the second thing I started doing is I started paying attention to myself. And I'm reading my notes here. So, this weird thing happened where the more I verbally expressed what I wanted internally, I started to actually notice more needs before I got to the point of no return. For example, I'm going to use being hangry. Do you know somebody who gets really, really hangry? They're hungry and they're just mad and they just want to argue. And the truth is, they probably felt that hunger way before they got to this point. But it took that extreme point of irritability before they were in the space to actually do something about it. In the same way, when I started verbalizing my needs, I actually noticed a lot of other areas that I had not been addressing, and I noticed them before they got to the point where they were overwhelming. I mean, sometimes it's basic stuff that adds up, especially if you're a little forgetful or you get really hyper focused. You can just basic stuff like drinking water. Did you stop and eat lunch, or did you just work through lunch? Um, Sometimes it's sleep. Is this the third or fourth night you're staying up super late? Usually I would go and go and go, and I would get to a point where I would get physically sick, and then I would have to just crash, and I would feel like the world was falling apart. But the more I would verbalize how I felt, I would actually just notice in the beginning. And even now, what I try and do is instead of focusing purely on the emotion, I try and ask, what do I need right now? And sometimes a small act, a little bit of comfort, a little bit of care goes a long way in a stressful day. Sometimes I just need to step away from my computer a little more often than I normally do. Sometimes I need to go and just be in a room that's quiet, or maybe I need music. But the more that I was verbalizing how I felt about things, and two things happened. Inwardly, I was able to care for myself better, and outwardly, I was better able to be relatable. So instead of just being cranky at home or being snappy, I was able to just say, hey, I need a minute, or hey, I need to eat, or hey, I need a break. And that really actually resolved a lot of conflict. I didn't have to wonder if I was just being somebody who people didn't want to be around because of the mood I was in. For me, I went to therapy. Personally, I did, and that it really did help me learn to verbalize, and it really helped me to verbalize how I feel. I know not everybody's into therapy, but for me, it was very helpful. Um, it helped me to slow down to take and to just be more mindful about myself so that I can continue to do what it is I want to do in life and I don't get stuck in these kind of loops of self-doubt. For me, I for a while I always felt like I was the rider in my own body. I felt like my emotions ran away from me, but as I begin to work through it, it's starting to feel more like I'm driving my emotions. The emotions come, right? You don't always plan to get upset, but in those moments, I don't feel like I have to necessarily hide what I feel. I feel like I can speak about it and the world's not going to fall apart and I can move through that emotion. So that's how paying attention helped me. The third thing that is really new that I am working on is I am making room to know people, the people who are important in my life. Are there people that you pass by daily who you see all of the time? Maybe they're your child's teacher. Maybe there's somebody you know at work who you always do the kind of, little chit chat with. Is there a way that you can take a little bit of time to truly know them? How well do you know your family? Like, really, I know that sometimes we think we know each other, but it's funny as an adult talking with my siblings, I can see that there are lots of situations that we solve very differently. So even now, I'm getting to know my siblings better because I'm taking the time to just talk with them and listen to them. Do your friends really know each other? Do you really know your friends? Do you really know your friends? Do you really know how they feel? Do your friends feel safe enough with you to disagree and to argue and to resolve the issue? Or do you all kind of just say the polite thing all the time? What you don't want to do is pretend that you're closer than you really are, because eventually that relationship will be tested, and if it's not really a secure relationship, it won't last. And I think if you're going to be spending your time with people, especially people who you call friends, it's worth really knowing who they are, really trusting each other. And the truth is, what you water grows. And so there's no real shortcut to getting to know people other than getting to know them, asking them questions. We started out this podcast talking about how creativity grows in community. And I am coming to understand that building a community takes time. Whether it's your friendships or your family, it's going to take time and it's going to be an investment. You might have to be the one to make the first call or text. You might have to be the one to reach out, and it may be awkward and uncomfortable. You may not always immediately get along. It can be even harder with people you've known for a long time, right? It's hard to kind of break that defined relationship. For example, if it's like a cousin or maybe it's a friend, maybe you've always just done one thing together, it's hard to be the one to actually go deeper. And sometimes we don't really know how to be around someone unless we're in a specific context, you know? Kind of like when you see, like, I remember when I was a kid, whenever I would see a teacher outside of school, it didn't work. My brain didn't compute because in my mind, that's the world they existed in. They couldn't have a family in my head. And I think sometimes we can do that with friends where, you may only go shopping to get, and I don't like that example. You may do that with friends where you do one specific activity together and you're in one specific context, and it can be awkward to try and break out of that. But I think if you have a friend or you have a family member who you really want to be in your life, you really want to keep close, then I think the awkwardness is worth it. It's worth going through it to grow that relationship. So I was listening to another podcast. It's let's see. I was listening to the Young Black Married Christian podcast, and they used an acronym that people have used for prayer, but they used it to talk about questions you can ask people, and it's a really easy thing to remember. The acronym is BLESS, BLESS, and what it stands for is body, labor, emotions, social life, and spiritual life. So if you're trying to get to know someone, maybe this will help you instead of, going for the question about the weather or, I don't know, how the traffic was. You can ask how they're feeling physically. That's a good place to start. I think with labor, obviously that's your job or what they do to work. Their emotions. And I think the way they framed it is that the questions go deeper as you go through the letters. So you can ask about their emotional health. How are they feeling? How are they doing? How are they processing what's going on in their life? You can also talk about their social life. That's their family, their friends, their relationships. And finally, it's their spiritual life. How's their relationship with God? How's their prayer life or their worship life? So this framework I found really helpful for me. I haven't fully tested it out yet, I will admit, because I listened to the podcast and I had a hard time remembering what the letter stood for. But I wanted to bring it back so that I can actually start using it myself, because I am trying to be very purposeful right now about calling people, checking on them, seeing how they are, even if it's for a few minutes. I really want to start building those relationships so that years from now, I have real community, real people who I care about, who care about me, and we know each other's terrible things, and we still love each other anyway, because that's what a family is, that's what friends are for. We're there for each other. Finally, listen is the last thing I have on here. Actually, no, it's not. The next thing is listen. I already spoke about this, but learning to listen is a skill. So if you want to be in a community successfully, you have to learn to listen. This means asking follow-up questions. This means not adding to what someone said or twisting it to work for you. This means respecting that people have boundaries, and many times in not listening, we walk all over those boundaries or preferences. This may mean hearing how what you did impacted someone else. And you may not see it the same way, but just listening and hearing just to understand where they're coming from. It's really hard to do. I'm still working on this one myself, but yeah, listening to how something you did hurt somebody and just listening and not defending yourself, to understand them, understand where they came from, just to have a meeting ground. Many times people just want to be heard, and it may seem like you're giving up and letting someone maybe say something you don't agree with. Maybe you didn't see what you did as that bad, but listening and hearing them out opens the door for you to come into a space where you can actually solve the issue. Whereas when you don't listen and when you don't actually let them speak, when you're defending yourself, you're both just going to be in fight mode. Nothing's going to actually be done. People really do crave real connection, and listening is the best way to do it. And it is not, it's really not what's the word? It's not a static thing. It really is a skill. And I'm actually reading a little bit more about it. I'm reading Never Split the Difference because I'm going to be doing a cool series here on empathy and I wanted to prepare for it. And it's been really eye opening because it goes into how listening can really affect negotiations. But I'm just looking at it from the sense of getting to know people, that people will tell you who they are if you listen. Finally, this one is for my friends who are still struggling with the idea of being honest with people about how you feel because of a fear of conflict. So I'm going to read this just to make sure I cover everything. If you struggle with the idea of controlling the peace by just allowing your boundaries to be crossed consistently, I want to leave you with this. There may come a day when you have to speak up for a serious reason, like safety or protection. And in an assailant safety class I took at work, there is a whole section that talked about how one of your first defenses against an attack is your voice. They mentioned that often criminals will take advantage of people's natural tendency towards friendliness, that some would look for those who were more worried about being polite than speaking up. And this reminded me that what you practice is what you will do in an emergency. If you practice using your voice, if you practice being honest about your emotions or thoughts and verbalizing them in a disagreement, you will hopefully be ready to do that when it matters most. Also, what I'm realizing is that by engaging the world in this way, you will attract people who believe this is healthy. If you are honest about your feelings, you actually begin to attract people who value that. And this is actually a good way to build a healthier community as opposed to creating a community of people who just want to dominate you because you're easy to dominate. And I'm not saying it makes their method right. I'm not saying that being dominating is okay. What I am saying is that in small ways or in any way you can, your ability to use your voice can actually build some safety for you. Another final point I want to make, I'm sort of wrapping it up here, right? How you listen to yourself will become how you listen to others, your children or your partner or your friends. For example, let's say you need 6 weeks to work on a project, but you really want to be impressive to your new boss, so you tell them that you can do that 6-week job in 1 week. So then a week goes by and two things happen, right? Number one, you drop everything to get this work done. And honestly, because you needed 6 weeks and you rush to do it in one, it's probably not your best work. It's not really a good representation of the company either. The second thing that happens is that the work doesn't get done and you miss the deadline. So they might be wondering, like, hey, you said it'd take a week. Why is it taking so much longer? And the truth is that you ignored the need. And so maybe in the moment, what felt like being super supportive actually didn't turn out that way. So the truth is that if you truly pay attention to your needs, your need for time or your need for certain resources, your need for rest, whatever it may be, that the way that you listen to yourself is the way you're going to treat other people's requests. And you're going to be able to actually help them more by being honest than you will if you just pretend you can do more than you actually can do. It starts with you. Practice with you. Be honest, and you'll build relationships that really do reflect you, good, bad, or ugly. And you'll know that people are with you not because you're nice, not because you're polite, not because you're agreeable, but because they love you. You know, nobody's perfect, and we don't have to pretend to be. Thank you for tuning in today to the Creativity Cure. Again, this was just something that I went through personally, and I know that the way I approached it may be very different than how other people would. So if you are like a pro at this topic and you have some ideas, feel free to send them to me via DM on Instagram at Bethany J Photography. And I would love to hear if you've ever realized that, hey, you weren't maybe being as open with people as you should be. And I'm always interested in learning how to build healthy relationships, how we can collaborate and work through conflict and be stronger, um, while still holding our boundaries. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can listen to this on Apple or Spotify. You can also watch me on YouTube. Just search The Creativity Cure. Please like, subscribe, and share, and also click the little notification bell, and that will let you know as soon as I release a new video. Also on YouTube, I occasionally do put videos that I don't actually put on the podcast, and in the newsletter that I have, which is available on BethanyJphotography.com, has content that is actually not on social media or on the podcast. So it's really a whole separate segment of content that is real people that I'm sharing who are local to me in Maryland. And I want to invite you into that community because I think that we should get to know our neighbors. And we can't do that if we don't actually talk to each other. So I want to get to know you. So join the newsletter at BethanyJphotography.com. Finally, the next time you're ready to celebrate originally, think of me. I make custom, one-of-a-kind portraits, and you can see what they look like by following at Bethany J Photography. I am currently booking for 2023. I have spots open for the spring, summer, and fall right now, and I would love to work with you. So if you want to collaborate, please visit my website, BethanyJphotography.com.